Hey, you guys know that saying, it's okay to not be okay, particularly in the circumstances. And I know it's a cliche, but it's particularly true right now. This is about my 10th attempt to make this video because I've got so much rage, so much frustration, outrage, anger, just a sense of helplessness about the situation in the world. And I know intellectually that the news, what we consume, thrives on the shit. I know that, right? I know that there are almost certainly lovely things going on in the world, but that is not what we are inundated with constantly. So I'm just going to talk through a bunch of things because ultimately the point of this video, for me at least, is to look for solutions, to look for some kind of way out of this malaise, this overwhelming sense of impenetrability of the system that we're currently living in. Like, what do we have in the system other than a vote, right? Once every 4 years, once every 5 years here in the UK. How do we affect what's happening to us and to other people in the world, far worse, in the context of this sense of helplessness? And I want to talk about a lot of things, but I want to be solution focused because for so long I felt just insanely mad at the world, the system, the politicians, the leaders, the people who are meant to be showing us the route through this bullshit, who seem utterly incapable of doing it. And I have no real hope for the US election. I've already been desperately disappointed by the UK elections, by the French elections, by the Germans. What should we talk about first? Just to give you a sense of what I feel is the current state of the world. Obviously, we've got to talk about Israel, but I'm going to loop round to that. I'm sure it'll come up in the context of more or less everything else I've got to say. And I'm absolutely certain that what I've had to say about Israel, Gaza, and now Lebanon is what got me banned from TikTok in the first place, because there's nothing like a Zionist for victimhood. You can't criticize Israel and the Zionists without them leaping up and down and calling you an anti-Semite, as if that means anything to me anymore, especially because 99% of the people accusing people like me of anti-Semitism are not fucking Semites, but are carrying out a genocide of Semites. It's an insane situation. You can see, got to keep calm in all of this. So let's talk about the UK election. Now, anyone who remembers on TikTok, I was desperately against people voting for Keir Starmer. It was blindingly obvious to me that he was a venal corporate shill, certainly a Zionist. I mean, that was no secret. But that the man was an empty balloon filled with other people's hot air. And what has emerged since the election simply confirms that. And I know that people who are cheerleading for getting the Tories out, and I'm thinking of people like Supetansky or even Carol Vorderman, who are kind of saying, oh, we've just got to get the Tories out. And I remember I made many videos about this, but you can't access my TikTok account, saying this Labour government under Starmer, Rayner, Reeves and all these people is not it. It's not how you get rid of it, because anyone who can point out any significant point of difference between the Tories we've just thrown out and Labour we've just welcomed in, please get in the comments and tell me a significant point of difference. Other than the colour of their ties, what have they done differently? And I'm thinking of continuing austerity, lying about fucking everything. Oh, we're going to reduce, we're not going to have tuition fees. Now they've just raised them. We're going to basically kill old people this coming winter. We're going, everything they're doing is a continuation of what they've watched for the last 14 years and criticized for the last 14 years. And it's like they're absolutely devoid of ideas, which seemed obvious to me in the campaign. But it's actually stunning. And I think part of the reason is not just the pure incompetence of the people involved, but also the fact that they've been in opposition for so long and sniping from the sidelines for so long that they actually don't know how to govern. They don't have an original idea is in their head, because the people with original ideas were purged from the party in 2018, 19, 20, when they got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, where there was obvious points of difference between the Tories and Labour. But because of Israel, they had to get rid of them with lies about his anti-Semitism and racism. And the right-wing bastards who did that are now in power and unable to distinguish themselves from the Tories because they believe the same things as the Tories. They're basically Thatcherites. I honestly think that Rachel Reeves is likely to be worse than Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I have zero doubt that Keir Starmer is going to be the equivalent of Boris Johnson. He'll make Sunak look absolutely competent. And it's not that he can't govern, because his way of governing is to simply withdraw the whip from anyone who says anything different to him or believes anything different or actually has any kind of moral compass or principled stance on anything. Whoop, don't want to do that. Sorry guys, I'm not a professional, obviously. And so we have this situation where we've replaced one bunch of arseholes with another bunch of arseholes who say, oh, we can't afford to do nice things for the people. But we're in a debt-based economy already. You know, the amount of debt is 7 times the income, at least, of the world's GDPs. Just increase the debt. Or, and here's a thought, tax the fucking rich. Right? But they seem so averse to that for reasons that they've never been able to articulate. I've been looking at this ideologically. What is their problem with taxing corporations and the super wealthy? Just a little bit more, just a tiny bit more. And they just keep saying, well, you know, no, austerity is the way forward. And just thinking, why? Why? When it hasn't worked for 14 fucking years, why is it going to start working now? It makes no sense. But people are talking about the corruption, the venality. And look, yes, having some billionaire buy your clothes and your designer glasses and all of that stuff is absurd and ridiculous, particularly when you're worth a lot of money and earning a lot of money. It's absurd. The Taylor Swift tickets, the YouTube hosted gigs to Glastonbury. Corporate culture is awash with this type of shit. I'm not surprised that they did it. But that isn't the real scandal in my view. The fact that Lord Ali gave, 20 grand's worth or another, whatever the hell the added amounts are, to Keir Starmer for clothes is not the scandal. The scandal is what was he buying? And he'd already bought influence in the Labour Party through an employee of his who was the head of selection for all the MPs. And we saw before the election, and I talked about it, good progressive left-wing candidates being hoofed out of the seats that they were meant to be running in, out of selection by these guys, and these Zionist apparatchiks parachuted into these constituencies as the Labour candidate, into these safe Labour seats. So the Labour Party is stacked with people who were selected by Lord Ali's employee, who's still engaged by the Labour Party. So what was he buying? What was he giving Keir? He was taking control of the party from a man who is notionally in charge of the party, but is actually incapable of running it and needs the support. And the price of that support is we get to choose who runs the country, right? That's the scandal. And above that, where they deliberately withheld reporting of a £4 million donation from a Cayman Island-based hedge fund that has interests, in particular, in my view, in circumstances where that demented Chucky doll Wes Streeting has been appointed health secretary, and Starmer's insistence that there's no money for the NHS, that has already been deliberately underfunded for years and years and years by the Tories. And here's another absolute point of no fucking difference, the Labour government continuing the same thing, but with the backing of I think the third largest donation in British political history from a company with direct interests in private healthcare. What does that say? And what it says to me is that not only are they lying to us, but there's a conspiracy behind the scenes, conspiracy with a small c, to privatize the NHS. And the price of that to these venal, corrupt assholes is $4 million, right? To get the multi-billion-pound prize, which every health company in the world has been trying to get its fingers on 20 years. So we're in this weird situation where the surface level corruption of suits and glasses and his wife's underwear and all this shit is not the story. The story is what's happening underneath that with Lord Ali, with the hedge fund, and of course the shit that we don't know about yet, but I guarantee is about to come out. And that's just the Labour government after what, 2 months of being in power. You see this in recent days where Keir Starmer has come out and said that we must have a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, but at the same time they're arming the fucking terrorist state of Israel, which is the direct overlap with the supposed left of Kamala Harris and the Democrats' campaign, where you've got former progressives who I held out hope for, people like AOC saying Kamala's working tirelessly for a ceasefire. Fuck off. She's doing fuck all. Just days ago, they gave $8.7 or $8.3 billion to Israel on top of the $100 billion they've already given them to continue the genocide that they've now extended to the Lebanese. Long before we get to the fact that we're all walking around with devices that could explode on us because some fucking Zionist decided to put some explosive in there during the chain of supply. Our own news media are saying that's clever, that's a good scheme, that's a bit James Bondy. Right, okay, cool. So you're happy to buy a new phone from Israel. You're happy to buy a new piece of kit, a solar panel, any fucking thing. Because these psychopaths are doing stuff that is unconscionable in a normal world. If we saw it in a movie, it would be super villain shit. It would be Dr. No shit. There would be outrage around the world. If any other person or government blew up 3,000 pages in a foreign country, the place would be a fucking bomb site by now. But no, when Israel does it, it's clever, it's good, it's helpful. Fuck, man. This is why I feel so helpless at the moment. What I mean by helplessness is that every now and again, politicians pop up, and I love young politicians like AOC, and we've got Zara Sultana here doing a great job in the UK. But AOC, who looked like some kind of future for the left, for progressives, is towing the party line. And this is what I mean about the impenetrability of the system. It doesn't matter what your core principles and beliefs are, or why you became a politician, or how you got elected. Because as soon as you're there for any length of time, you just get sucked into the whole machinery to the point where you can't step out of line, where you have to go on TV and talk absolute shit like Kamala Harris is working tirelessly for a ceasefire. You have to go out and say this shit, even though your brain must be screaming at you, if you have an ounce of morality left, that this is a lie, that this is a corporate line that somebody has told you to say, or you're fucking out. You look upwards at your party machinery from her position, and you look at Biden's cabinet, and every single person is either a Jewish Zionist or married to a Zionist, other than the Secretary of Defense. Since the late 80s, the State Department has been, I believe, over 70% Zionist, despite the Jewish population of America being just 2% of the population. In other words, the Zionists have very deliberately infiltrated every area of government and bureaucracy in the United States, where I would say it is impossible for the US president to stand up to Netanyahu and his psychopathic cabinet and the Israeli occupation force. Half of the people that are there are joint Israeli American citizens. Antony Blinken, after October 7th, went to Israel not as an American, but as a Jew and an Israeli. Brian Mast, Josh Shapiro. These are guys with sit in Congress, who have dual citizenship and have both fought in the IOF. Are these people supposed to make rational decisions about foreign policy and the geopolitical scene in the Middle and the Near East, especially in circumstances where the Zionists have been so successful over the years of equating Jewishness with Zionism, so that criticism of Israel or Zionism is criticism of the Jews, which is an absurd position, particularly given that so many Jews are against the existence of Israel and the Zionist state. Above all that, these are the people who decide who is a terrorist, right? Or who is an adversary. So we have this domination of a political and bureaucratic system that is filled with people who get the power to say this person or this organization is a terrorist, or these are our enemies, these are our adversaries. And we don't get to say why, or to be provided with a reason other than a scripted message to us about, these are just, well, they're obviously bad people. They did this, this, and this, they did October the 7th, Hamas, they must be evil. Forget the fact that for 75 years, Israel has occupied Palestine in the most repressive way possible, and that Hamas, for example, could easily be seen as a liberation organization, and in my view should be. Hezbollah, I don't know much about it, to be honest, but what I do know is that Israel's control and previous invasions of southern Lebanon provide a pretty firm foundation for having an organization that counters that territorialism, colonialism of the European Israeli state in an Arab Middle East. So basically, in those cases, it's Israel deciding that they're terrorists, right? It's the oppressor deciding to call the oppressed terrorists in order to justify action against them. And we'll just go, okay, because we have no power to fight back against these designations. It's the same, in my view, as constantly referring to Russia and China as our enemies, our adversaries, without underpinning that assertion with why. Why are they? China's a communist country. Well, we can have an argument till the cows come home about whether it's really communist or not. But what interests me about it is, what are its expansionist ideas? What's it trying to do that makes it an enemy? Is it planning to invade us? Is it planning to ideologically shift the world towards communism? I don't see evidence of that. I don't see, outside of, and I'll talk about Russia separately, but even if they are actually our enemies, right, as opposed to just another group of people with a different idea who have decided to dominate the world economically, at least try to, when it's the people who have dominated the world economically for the last close on 100 years, get to say that somebody else trying to do that is an enemy or an adversary. And it's like, how does that stack up? When did China last invade someone? Well, I can tell you, America's invaded a pretty big amount of countries over the years. So has the United Kingdom, right? And so we're in this position where the people doing the invading, doing the economic dominance, doing the cultural appropriation, taking the minerals, watching children mine cobalt in the Congo, watching people die in civil wars all over the world, Yemen, Sudan, all of these places, in order to secure oil and other resources that we need in the West, and doing absolutely fuck all about that, right? In fact, encouraging it. But at the same time, other countries just, trying to do a similar thing are enemies and adversaries. Now, I know I'm naive about these kind of things. The point I'm making is, how do we as ordinary citizens penetrate this system when it is so multifaceted and so secure, right? And of course, it's not just about Israel. It's about Western hegemony and economics. And how do we get people to care, to have compassion? We would have thought for example, that a Labour government, being supposedly on the left, would come forward with a position of more compassion and care than a Tory government. But of course that hasn't happened. In fact, they appear to be worse. So what my overall point is, and I'm sorry it's taking so long to get there, is that where's the way in for us? Because our vote is largely useless. I mean, I'm not saying it's completely useless. I believe people should vote, but the system of gerrymandering and the way in which the uni parties work, certainly in the United States and the UK, mean that we have minimal impact and that the elections have minimal impact. And so we look at France, for example, right? The left win by a considerable margin, but under the powers of the system, Macron just decides to appoint a more centrist right-wing government because he can, and he doesn't want the left-wing government. So even the votes of the people in France meant nothing at the end of the day, because some guy just decides that they're wrong and he's going to do things differently. Look outside of the macro political and geopolitical scene, and we look at the lack of provision of food, we look at homelessness, we look at climate change, we look at the Farage riots and the right, we look at the way in which people are being manipulated by arseholes like Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage and Richard Tice to target people that are not the problem, to target people who are in desperate situations, and then have these dickheads going, you're the cause of the problem in my country, when in fact it's not even close to being the problem. The problem, of course, being the continued rape of the working and middle classes by an elite who own the corporations that pay the shitty wages and then distribute insane dividends and profit to their shareholders, who are all up, for the most part, in the 1%. And even before we get to racism and misogyny and transphobia and all of those issues in life, and that's what I mean about my rage, is that at every level, the way I look at the world, how the world is shaped right now, I feel a helplessness to do anything about it, and I feel frustrated. So I come on here and rant. But what I've spent the last week doing since I was thrown off TikTok is thinking, okay, it's easy in a way, certainly for me, to rant about this stuff, to rage about what's wrong with the world. But it's far, far harder to come up with solutions and say, well, what can we do about it? And I think that sense of helplessness has really made me pretty much fucking depressed. And so I thought, well, what are the solutions? Before we look at what's the right solution, what possibilities are there for us? And I think the first one is just give up and disengage. Just meet the world on your own terms as much as you can and ignore all the shit that's going on. Which, if you're in a privileged position like somebody like me, where you've got enough money to do that, you've got a roof over your head, you've got food on the table, you can retreat into your world. Now, that's not going to help anyone else, but you know, let's say you've beat your head against a wall for 30 years, as I sometimes feel I have. Am I entitled to just go, right, that's enough, I'm out? Right? I think it's valid. It's not what I'm going to do, but I think it's a solution. At a personal level, the obvious solution is to join the game, right? Join them. If you can't beat them, join them. Get into politics. Stand for election, the corridors of power. Become somebody with influence within that. The trouble is, if we go back to what I said about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is that the system will corrupt you. I have multiple stories of politicians who have gone in with the best of motives and the best of principles, and simply ended up being part of the machinery that I'm trying to address here. I don't believe that that's a solution, because it doesn't work. Everyone who goes in there probably believes they can, right? Because their principles are so strong, their ideology is solid, and it never fucking happens, does it? You get these rare exceptions of a Gorbachev or a Mandela or a Gandhi, these kind of characters who do penetrate through, but it's so rare. And you've got to remember that Nelson Mandela was designated a terrorist by the United States until 2008. He'd been president of of South Africa in that period. So, yeah, I don't believe that's a solution. So the third solution is fight, protest, divestment, boycott, protest. Just fight, rage. Do what I'm doing as much as I can. And what I mean by that is you deal with the system by being a pain in the ass to the system. But what you do in the background is that you build community, mutual aid. You love, you engage with people in a way that shows compassion, that answers the question, what would love do? That shares, that recognizes that we are not islands, that we are part of a whole, of an organism that includes other animals, the earth, all of these things, but certainly includes every other person on this planet. That if we see them as humans, then we have to treat them as humans. And the golden rule comes into play. Treat others as you would wish to be treated. Hold the system to account, but hold yourself to account as well, to make sure that your relationships are solid and loving and based on mutual respect, care. And in all circumstances, when decisions about what to do arise, you don't ask the question, what's in it for me? You ask the question, what is the loving thing to do here? What is the compassionate thing to do? How do I react to this person in a way that elevates the world instead of perpetuating the systems that we're trapped in? It's not just abandoning individualism, it's abandoning consumerism. Because the one thing we know works, we know this works, is boycotts and affecting the money. Look at Starbucks, look at these companies where they've lost huge amounts of share value because people have recognized that the corporation's stance on an issue, in this case Israel, is unacceptable. And we have the power of the purse. We are billions. The people currently in power who maintain the system that I'm railing against here are a couple of thousand people, right? And they have a tremendous amount of power, both in money, militarily, economically, in all of these ways. But we have the numbers. We have the ability to affect the economy. We have the ability to say no. When they say we're going to send $8.7 billion to Israel, we can say no. That's not going to stop them sending it now, but it will eventually, when it affects their lives, when we vote them out for doing these things, right? That's how we affect change over time. There's that beautiful old saying that a wise man plants trees that he will never enjoy the shade of. And this process that I'm advocating for, one of protest, divestment, but behind that community love and mutual aid, will take a generation, because the current system is so embedded and so rigid and so strong that we're not going to change it overnight like that. But if we move away from it, disengage from it, refuse to engage in it, we will succeed eventually in building a better world where we don't have to sit and rant about shit for half an hour to tell everyone how bad the world is, but we can share stories of how bad it used to be and how good it is now, and improving every day. Love, compassion, care is what we need. I love you, and I hope you've enjoyed this rant.